The film opens by introducing a teenage delinquent named Tommy. One night, Tommy takes his girlfriend, Gebby, to meet up with their friends who are waiting outside a bar. As soon as they arrive, Tommy and his friends immediately start causing trouble. They take illegal drugs, provoke a security guard, and eventually gang up on him. After managing to get inside the bar, they continue their reckless behavior, getting drunk, using drugs, swapping partners, and engaging in various immoral acts. Gebby can no longer stand Tommy's increasingly uncontrollable behavior, but Tommy doesn't care at all. Arrogantly, he even claims that the city belongs to him. After that, Tommy keeps repeating the same destructive lifestyle without caring about rules or morality. Eventually, he completely loses consciousness and stumbles home while barely able to walk. At that moment, a car can be seen following him from behind. The vehicle then stops just as Tommy collapses unconscious in the middle of the street. Elsewhere, a man named Chris is shown waiting for someone at a restaurant. Not long after, the person he is waiting for arrives, a woman named Katrina. It turns out Katrina has come to apply for a job at Chris's house. Before hiring her, Chris asks several questions to make sure she has no history of smoking or drug use, as he refuses to employ anyone with addiction problems. Katrina explains that she has never had those habits. Satisfied with her answers, Chris asks her to sign a work contract. The following day, Katrina arrives at Chris's family home using the address she was given. The house is located far away from any residential area, with a long distance between the gate and the main building. As Katrina stands outside the gate, someone rings a bell from inside the house, prompting Chris to immediately head toward one of the rooms. Inside, his wife Catherine is seen sitting silently and gloomily without saying a single word. Noticing Katrina still waiting outside, Chris opens the gate remotely with a control device. Inside the house, he unlocks the main door, which is secured with multiple extra locks. Chris welcomes Katrina inside, but immediately scolds her for arriving 38 minutes earlier than the agreed time.
Inside the house, Chris scans Katrina's body with a metal detector to make sure she is not carrying any dangerous objects. He also enforces strict rules, including a ban on using cell phones while inside the house. Katrina's phone is confiscated and locked inside a safe during working hours. Chris then brings up Katrina's profile, which stated that she was willing to do unusual types of work. Katrina asked what would happen if she refused any task assigned by him. Chris immediately replies that their cooperation would end at once. In the middle of their conversation, Catherine suddenly appears, and Chris quickly introduces Katrina as someone who will help with the household chores. However, Catherine remains silent and says nothing. Afterwards, Chris gives Katrina a tour of the house while introducing its various rooms, from Catherine's reading room filled with Shakespeare works to their child's bedroom. There, Katrina meets their son, Jonathan. Jonathan appears friendly and seems like a kind child. Next, Chris takes Katrina down to the basement. Inside, someone can be seen lying, chained by the neck. That person turns out to be Tommy himself. Katrina is visibly terrified and immediately tries to leave. However, Chris attempts to explain that Tommy is sick and that they are only trying to cure him. Chris also assures her that no one in the house will be harmed. Katrina says nothing and intends to collect her belongings and leave, but Chris stops her and reveals that he has investigated her background. Her troubled past at her previous workplace has left her at risk of deportation, making it very difficult for her to find another job. Chris even pressures her by saying he will report her presence to immigration authorities if she leaves. In the end, Katrina has little choice and agrees to continue working in the house. Once she starts working, Chris provides various cleaning supplies and explains that Katrina is not allowed to use outside cleaning products because everything in the house is environmentally friendly. Chris also stresses that while cleaning the basements, Katrina must not respond to anything Tommy says, since Tommy is under severe stress and may say abusive things. Chris even gives her self-defense tools such as a stun gun and pepper spray in case Tommy becomes threatening. Katrina begins carrying out her duties, from cleaning the floors to doing the laundry. Tommy, who had previously been asleep, suddenly wakes up because of the sound of the washing machine. Seeing a stranger there, he immediately starts shouting insults and demands that Katrina free him. However, Katrina completely ignores him, which only makes Tommy even more aggressive. Katrina then goes upstairs, making Chris realize that she had an unpleasant experience downstairs. Chris once again tries to reassure her, explaining that they have not been keeping Tommy confined for very long and that he is currently just going through a rebellious phase. That day, Katrina finishes her work and goes straight home. According to her contract, she only works twice a week and is not scheduled to return for several more days. After Katrina leaves, Tommy becomes even more violent inside his room. Not long after, Chris arrives carrying a pizza made by Jonathan. However, instead of eating it, Tommy throws away the pizza. Tommy immediately starts hurling insults at Chris, cursing him relentlessly and even swearing that he will rip Chris's skull apart if he ever gets out of there, as revenge for everything Chris has done to him. Tommy briefly tries to attack, but the chain around his neck restrains him. In the end, Chris shocks Tommy with a stun device until he becomes powerless. A moment later, Chris places a television in front of Tommy and shows him recordings of his past behavior. In one live broadcast, Tommy and his group are seen stealing a car and recklessly driving it while drunk. They even vandalize the vehicle. Tommy actually looks proud of what he did, which only frustrates Chris further. Chris begins lecturing him about life. The footage also shows Chris and Jonathan giving educational presentations about reckless driving accidents that often end in death. That night, Tommy starts jumping around again while trying to free himself from the chain. Accidentally, he falls over and spills a container he uses as a toilet. Not long afterward, Chris and Catherine come downstairs to check on him. Tommy curls up on the floor, so Chris immediately approaches him. Suddenly, Tommy throws his pants at Catherine and then tries to strangle Chris using the chain around his neck. Chris quickly tells Catherine to go upstairs while he fights back and manages to subdue Tommy. Afterward, Chris goes upstairs to grab a bag before rushing back downstairs. While passing Jonathan's room, Jonathan asks if he can read comic books belonging to someone named Charlie. Chris allows it, but only on the condition that Catherine was not find out about it. Chris then hurriedly carries the bag into the basement. Down there, Tommy once again throws insults at Chris. However, Chris views Tommy's earlier behavior as harassment toward his wife. Naturally, Tommy disagrees, insisting that he is the real victim there, not Chris or Catherine. Instead, Chris accuses Tommy of being part of a generation that always plays the victim, acting as though they are constantly oppressed. At this point, Tommy becomes even angrier. He keeps cursing, even mocking Jonathan by calling him ugly and threatening to kill him. Those threats finally make Chris lose control. Chris immediately sprays pepper spray into Tommy's face, then repeatedly beats him with a baton while continuously calling him a bad child. The next day, Katrina returns to work. While she is cleaning, Tommy, whose shoulders are now covered in bruises, once again throws insults at her. Katrina firmly tells him that she cannot help him, which only makes Tommy even angrier. Tommy mocks Katrina as a useless, ugly immigrant, tells her to go back to her country, and calls her a parasite. His words deeply hurt Katrina, bringing her to tears. Seeing this, Chris orders Tommy to apologize immediately. At first, Tommy refuses, but when Chris approaches him, Tommy seems traumatized by the treatment he received the previous night and finally apologizes to Katrina. Afterward, Chris treats Tommy's wounds while insisting that he is not a psychopath. That night, at Jonathan's request, Chris brings Tommy into the family living room. To prevent Tommy from escaping, Chris installs a metal hook in the ceiling to secure the chain around Tommy's neck. Jonathan then prepares popcorn so they can all watch a movie together peacefully. Chris chooses a classic war movie, but Jonathan dislikes it and suggests another film instead, which turns out to be Charlie's favorite movie. As they watch, Catherine comes downstairs and they invite her to join them. In the middle of the movie, Tommy begins to cry. He then asks for the film to be turned off and begs to be taken back to the basement. After bringing Tommy downstairs, Catherine and Chris return to their bedroom. Catherine talks about how the earlier moment reminded her of Charlie again. She even admits that she dreamed about Charlie the previous night and saw him visiting them looking much healthier than before. Meanwhile, in the basement, Tommy keeps trying to remove the chain from his neck while a television continuously plays educational programs about drug abuse in an attempt to rehabilitate him. No matter how hard Tommy struggles, the chain cannot be removed because it is made from extremely thick and durable metal. Eventually, Tommy breaks down in tears, realizing he is trapped with no escape. The next day, Tommy chooses to apologize to Catherine for everything he has done and promises not to repeat his actions. However, Tommy also says that Catherine should never have poured someone else's urine on him, no matter how terrible his mistakes were. Catherine begins to soften and eventually forgives him. Instead of freeing Tommy, Chris moves the television closer and once again plays recordings of Tommy's past behavior. At the same time, Catherine notices that Tommy squints while watching, as though something is affecting his eyesight. Because of that, she gives him a pair of glasses so he can see more clearly.
The footage shows Tommy and his gang brutally beating someone until the victim is bloodied, helpless, and barely conscious. Watching this, Tommy finally begins to feel remorse and realizes just how cruel his actions truly were. In the end, he asks for the video to be turned off. Tommy then argues that he has already taken responsibility for his crimes and was granted parole. However, Chris denies this and states that they have investigated Tommy's background. Despite committing numerous criminal acts, Tommy has continued roaming free without facing real consequences.
As time passed, Tommy gradually stopped rebelling as often. As a reward, Chris extended the chain around Tommy's neck so he could reach the toilet and use it more comfortably. In addition, Chris gave Tommy a radio, while Catherine provided him with clothes and several books to read. While they were talking, the doorbell suddenly rang, even though Katrina was not scheduled to work that day. Chris immediately warned Tommy to stay silent and not try anything, or he would be shocked with the stun device again. Catherine went to the door to see who had arrived. It turned out to be a delivery courier bringing a package. Somehow, the courier had managed to get through the gate without their knowledge. After the courier left, Chris praised Tommy for staying calm and not causing trouble. On the other hand, it was revealed that Jonathan had been the one who opened the gate. Catherine immediately warned Jonathan never to open the gate again under any circumstances. Afterward, Chris installed a sliding track system on the ceiling. A moment later, Catherine came carrying cigarettes she had found in Jonathan's pocket. As punishment, they forced Jonathan to smoke the entire cigarette at once, causing him to choke while his throat burned and he struggled to breathe. Not long after that, Katrina arrived for work. Tommy apologized for his previous behavior, then tried asking for Katrina's full address, acting as though he had the right to know where she lived. Naturally, Katrina refused to tell him. Tommy then attempted to grab some of Katrina's work equipment that had gotten stuck nearby, but the chain around his neck was still too short for him to reach it. Upstairs, Chris was preparing food for Tommy. By now, Chris had started trusting him slightly more and allowed him to use metal utensils instead of plastic ones like before. When Chris came downstairs, Tommy was sitting calmly while reading a book. Chris tried greeting him politely, but Tommy immediately mocked him instead. Tommy revealed that Chris used to be a police officer and questioned what kind of policeman kidnaps and imprisons people in a basement. Tommy begged to be released and promised he would never report them to anyone. Of course, Chris ignored the request and played another recording instead. This time, the footage showed Tommy and his gang bullying a child, stealing the boy's phone, smashing it, and even burning the child's face with a cigarette. Unable to endure watching it, Tommy finally asked Chris to stop the video. The next day, Chris tried helping Jonathan with his homework. However, Jonathan looked frightened and struggled to understand what Chris was teaching him. Chris kept pressuring Jonathan while insisting that he was not stupid. Seeing this, Catherine eventually stepped in and took over teaching Jonathan herself. Chris then went back downstairs and greeted Tommy again. Tommy once more mocked him, saying that Chris sat comfortably at the dinner table while he himself was treated like a dog. Chris ignored the insult and instead discussed the book Tommy had been reading, asking which parts Tommy still did not understand. Seeing Tommy's gradual improvement, Chris promised to reward him with a beer every time he finished reading a book. From then on, Tommy became increasingly interested in reading even while exercising. As a form of appreciation, they eventually celebrated Tommy's birthday. After Tommy blew out the candles and ate some cake, Chris asked for one thing in return. He then showed Tommy a bottle of chloroform and a cloth, making it clear that Tommy was about to be sedated again. At first, Tommy refused because he always felt dizzy whenever they did this to him. However, he had no choice. The next morning, Tommy woke up in an open grassy field with the chain still attached around his neck. Not far away, Chris and his family could be seen having a picnic together. Catherine explained that it would be a shame for Tommy's birthday to be spent entirely indoors. For a brief moment, they looked almost like a happy family. Tommy was even able to play together with Jonathan.
After the outing ended, Tommy was sedated once again with chloroform so he would not remember the route they had taken and to prevent any unwanted incidents. Not long afterward, Tommy woke up inside a bedroom. It turned out that Chris had begun trusting him more and had given him his own room, meaning Tommy no longer needed to sleep in the basement. In addition, Chris installed a sliding track system on the ceiling that allowed Tommy to move from one room to another. Although Tommy was still chained by the neck, a locking mechanism was attached to the end of the rail to keep him confined within the designated track. Catherine also attached the bell to Tommy's neck so they could hear his movements at all times.
As time went on, the sliding track system was expanded, allowing Tommy to access almost every part of the house. Tommy could now go to the living room to relax, read books, play games, or watch television. This development made Chris feel as though they were finally becoming a real family. One night, Jonathan entered Tommy's room to play with him. Tommy then asked about the desk inside the room. At first, Chris claimed the desk had been bought secondhand, but Tommy did not believe him and suspected the room had once belonged to someone else. When Tommy asked who the previous owner was, Chris suddenly called Jonathan away, causing the boy to leave without answering the question. Meanwhile, outside the house, Katrina could be seen going somewhere while someone secretly watched her from a distance. The next day, Katrina returned to work as usual. However, Tommy noticed that she seemed gloomy and unusually quiet. Trying to comfort her in his own way, Tommy joked that he would beat up whoever had made her look that miserable, as long as that person came to the house. Tommy then attempted to persuade Katrina to tell him the password for the sliding track restriction system, but Katrina insisted she did not know it. Not long afterward, Catherine was seen sitting alone in the garden while Chris quietly watched her through a window. At the same time, Chris carefully adjusted Tommy's chain to make sure it was loose enough for him to move comfortably while still remaining under control. Tommy sensed that something was seriously wrong in Chris and Catherine's relationship, but Chris firmly stated that it was none of Tommy's business. A little later, Catherine returned inside and realized that Katrina had not gone home even though her working hours were already over. Feeling that something was wrong, Catherine asked Katrina to come closer and explain the situation. Katrina admitted that she felt as though someone had been following her and suspected it was connected to her former employer, who might have discovered where she was staying. Terrified and unsure where else to go, Katrina confessed that she no longer felt safe returning home. Catherine then offered to let Katrina stay temporarily at their house. However, there was no spare room available except for the basement. Tommy immediately rejected the idea, and Katrina also looked uncomfortable with the arrangement. Nevertheless, Catherine firmly stated that she did not like being told no. In the end, Katrina had no choice but to accept and decided to stay there temporarily.
The next day, Chris returned home after shopping. Tommy was sitting casually while reading a book, and Jonathan brought him a drink. Catherine sat nearby reading as well. Together, they almost looked like a warm and ordinary family. At that moment, Tommy asked Catherine for help adjusting his chain, while discussing the book he had just finished reading. Indirectly, Tommy managed to distract Catherine from both Katrina and Chris. That night, Katrina looked outside and noticed Chris preparing some kind of surprise in the backyard. It turned out that Chris had arranged the romantic dinner in the garden, and the idea had actually come from Tommy, who hoped it would make Catherine happy again. For the first time in a very long while, Catherine could be seen laughing sincerely. Watching the warm and romantic atmosphere from a distance, Tommy instead looked heartbroken. He silently stared at them while tears rolled down his face. At that moment, Katrina entered the room, causing Tommy to ask her to retrieve a long object for him. At first, Katrina refused and threatened to report him. However, Tommy knew Katrina was not the type of person who liked telling on others. Eventually, Katrina opened the drawer and allowed Tommy to try reaching for the item himself. While Chris and Catherine were enjoying their romantic moment outside, Tommy used his feet to pull the drawer closer and struggled to grab the long object before hiding it inside a flower vase. At the same time, Jonathan entered the room and happily admitted that he was grateful to finally see his parents smiling again. Jonathan sincerely thanked Tommy for helping make that happen. Later, Chris visited Tommy in his room to personally thank him as well for the idea. After many years, Chris said he could finally see Catherine smile again, and he promised he would never forget what Tommy had done for them. Tommy then asked why they had chosen him. At first, Chris did not understand the question, so Tommy clarified what he meant. Why had they kidnapped him specifically instead of someone else? Tommy already suspected that someone else had once lived in that room and had been treated the same way he was being treated now. Chris initially denied it, which prompted Tommy to ask what happened to the previous person. This time, Chris did not answer at all. The next day, Chris went out. Meanwhile, a group of people arrived looking for Katrina. Katrina and Catherine, who were cleaning outside, immediately panicked and ran back into the house.
However, the men chased after them and forced their way inside. Tommy tried to confront the intruders while Catherine ordered them to leave immediately. At that moment, Katrina apologized to Catherine and revealed that the people were actually her own family members. To prevent violence from happening, Katrina ultimately chose to leave with them. But before leaving, Katrina hugged Tommy and secretly whispered the password needed to unlock the sliding track system. The men waiting for Katrina became irritated and wrapped Tommy's chain tightly around his neck. Not long afterward, Chris returned home. Catherine immediately explained everything that had happened and told him they had lost Katrina. Chris then entered Tommy's room and saw that Tommy had been badly beaten while trying to protect the family. Chris told Tommy that he was extremely proud of him for acting like a real man. He even referred to himself as Tommy's father and promised he would never forget Tommy's loyalty. To improve security, Chris promised to install CCTV cameras and motion sensors, which indirectly restricted Tommy's freedom even more. Chris then asked Tommy to help install the equipment, behaving as though they truly were father and son.
At night, Tommy cannot sleep. He decides to sneak out and attempts to unlock the sliding track barriers using the password Katrina gave him. Tommy successfully opens several locks, but there are far too many of them. When he reaches the final lock, he retrieves the long object he had hidden earlier. Tommy then tries to remove the last restraint. Hearing suspicious noises, Chris immediately goes downstairs to investigate. He quickly realizes that Tommy is attempting to escape, so he grabs a pistol and heads down. By the time Chris arrives, Tommy is already hiding and launches a surprise attack on him. Tommy then runs toward the door but struggles because it is secured with numerous extra locks. Chris calmly tells Tommy that all the keys are with him. He also asks Tommy to stay quiet so Jonathan will not wake up. Desperate, Tommy eventually points the gun at Chris. Meanwhile, Chris tries to convince him that he has changed and become a good boy. At the same time, Catherine comes downstairs and approaches Tommy. She tells him that he does not truly want to leave and tries to take the gun from his hands. However, Tommy refuses and says that none of them are his family. He reminds them that he was locked in a basement, punished whenever he disobeyed, and treated like a puppet or even a dog. Tommy firmly declares that he is not a pet that can be controlled however they want. Catherine attempts to calm him by promising that he will not be chained that night, but Tommy still insists on going home. When Catherine asks what will happen to Jonathan if Tommy leaves, Tommy replies that Jonathan is a good child, but his mind has already been poisoned just like the previous victim. Tommy also insists that the room was never his and that he refuses to end up like the previous person. Seeing that Tommy can no longer be controlled, Chris finally opens the door and allows him for leave. Chris feels that everything has come to an end because he fears that the terrible incident from the past might repeat itself. Catherine cannot accept this and nearly hurts herself, but Chris quickly stops her. Meanwhile, Tommy immediately runs away from the house. During his escape, he eventually collapses unconscious. He is later found and taken to the police station. When questioned about his disappearance for the past several months, Tommy initially claims that he was kidnapped by a family and turned into a replacement child. However, to everyone's surprise, he later changes his statement and says that he was only hallucinating and hiding away to find peace. After finishing with the police, Tommy returns to the bar. There he sees Gebby completely out of control and abusing drugs just like he used to. The next day, Tommy carries a large bag and meets Gebby, who is already waiting outside. Gebby asks where they are going, but Tommy does not answer and simply tells her to let him drive. During the trip, Gebby says that she wants to disappear. Then Tommy stops the car and knocks her unconscious using chloroform. Afterward, he burns their car. Tommy then leads Gebby on foot until they finally arrive in front of Chris's house. Chris immediately opens the gate and Tommy walks inside. Chris and his family come out to welcome Tommy back. Seeing his return, they smile happily. Earlier in the film, Catherine and Jonathan mentioned the name Charlie several times. This strongly suggests that Charlie was most likely the biological son of Catherine and Chris. However, unlike Jonathan, Charlie apparently could not be controlled by them. It is highly possible that Charlie resisted their treatment and eventually either ran away or died. Losing Charlie seems to have become the starting point of their obsession with creating the perfect child, someone obedient, submissive, and completely under their control. Eventually, they begin monitoring Tommy, a deeply troubled teenager, and become obsessed with changing and reshaping him into the kind of child they want. But in the film's ending, after finally escaping, Tommy shockingly gives Chris and family a new child instead, Gebby.